Members, it's the appointed time. We have a quorum. Welcome to the meeting of the panel on housing. Agenda item number 1. Information paper issued since last meeting. Since last meeting, the Secretariat has listed the information paper received on the agenda. Agenda item number 2, items for discussion at the next meeting. Please refer to CB brackets 1 962/2023 brackets 01 list of outstanding items for discussion and LC paper CB brackets 1 962/2023 brackets 02 list of follow-up actions. The following 2 items are suggested to be discussed in the next meeting.
These items are A. Funding application for the second batch of light public housing projects. These are close to the hearts of many people. And item B is HAD 711 project site formation and infrastructure works for public housing development at Kwok Shui Road, Chuen Wan Phase 2. It takes time to prepare the paper, so the administration suggests changing the date of the next meeting from December 4th to December 15th at 4:30 p.m. Members, do we all agree on the items to be discussed on the next meeting date? I see that members have no particular views on these. So the next meeting will be held at 4:30 p.m. on December the 15th, and 2 items will be discussed during the meeting. Agenda item 3, the major item of today's meeting, that is briefing by the Secretary for Housing on the Chief Executive's 2023 policy address. The relevant papers is set out in the agenda. I welcome Secretary and the other government officials for attending the meeting. I'll first invite Secretary to brief us on the housing-related initiatives in the policy address. There is a PowerPoint presentation. Secretary, please. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members, for attending the meeting. I will give you a briefing on the housing initiatives in 2023 policy address. There are a number of them in the policy address. Seems like there is something wrong with the pointer. Do you wish to go to slide 2? That's right. Sorry about that.
麻煩技術嘅同事。
Technicians, please.
好，唔該我自己電腦組嘅同事係呢個。
得係嘛？未得，再嚟個，再拉去全螢幕再。
Still working on that.
呢個掣唔好意思啊，呢個掣。
喺電腦度按啦，會唔會？係喎，用唔係。睇睇。
呢個好啊，都唔得，就咁用呢個，就咁用呢個 up and down。不如我哋用呢個啦，好嘛？
係咯。
How about we use this one instead? Please go to full screen. I don't think it can go to full screen now, for some reasons. Sorry about that. Let's use the small screen instead.
好啦，係，總之睇到得啦。
好，唔該晒。
As long as we can all see it. All right. I'll first tell you about the first year progress in terms of enhancing quantity, speed, and efficiency and quality. We have done a lot of work during the first year. Let me brief members about our progress as at this September. from 2023-24 to year 2027 to 28, over 90% of the traditional public housing is under construction or has entered the construction phase. For light public housing, the first batch of 2,100 units will be completed in year 2024 to 25, and our target is to complete all 30,000 light public housing units by year 2027 to 28, and we are seeing good progress, and tendering works have been conducted in a smooth manner. For transitional housing, as said this September, about 8,000 units are in operation, and the occupation rate is good. For the ones in urban areas, we see over 90% of occupancy rate. For ones in the new territories, about 89% of occupancy rate. The circulation of units in the urban areas is about 110%. There are about 13,000 units to be completed. For the private SSF pilot scheme, well, we are in discussion with the private developers, and we are preparing for the tendering process. As for the advanced move-ins or advanced allocation scheme, we are taking forward the scheme in phases. I'd like to thank some of the departments for finishing their work early, and we are planning to complete some of the blocks in phases. Say for the first half of 2024, we have over 2,000 PRH units to be completed by about 5 to 8 months in advance. We're hoping to hand over the keys to the PRH applicants so that they can move in as early as possible. In terms of the use of innovative technology, we have identified some projects for adopting the integrated construction approach. For the second half of this year, over half of the projects will be using this MIC approach. Currently, we have 5 projects that are adopting MIC approach. Hopefully, we can enhance speed and efficiency by doing that. As for the average waiting time, the original proposed waiting time was 6 years, and we're working towards reducing it to 5.3 years. Currently, the waiting time is about 5.3 years. For the well-being design initiatives, we have been collecting views in different housing estates. We've deployed the mobile vehicles, and quite a number of residents have taken part in the campaign. And after we have collected the views, we're going to incorporate them into our guidelines. The study will be completed next year, and as you can see from the pictures here, we're trying to incorporate the views collected into our design when we plan to refurbish the housing estates. For policy objectives in the future, we have quite a number of them. You can see on the screen that there are quite a number of initiatives that we plan to roll out. In the long run, the policy for the coming 10 years, that is 2024 to 2034, the latest figures is 308,000 in terms of the demand. And we have identified sufficient land for developing about 410,000 public housing units. We are ahead of our target by about 100,000 units. That means we have enough land for public housing. In the coming 5 years, for traditional public housing units, the construction or production volume will be 150,000. Including light public housing units, we're going to provide 172,000 units. Compared to the previous 5 year, we're 9% higher. Compared with the 5-year period at the beginning of the current term government, we have an addition of about 67,000 units. For the next 5-year period, we will continue to enhance speed and efficiency. We'll make use of different construction methods to expedite our supply of housing to meet our targets. We have also proposed other initiatives in relation to the mortgage default guarantee arrangements of second-hand subsidized flats. The current default guarantee period is 30 years, and we now have plans to extend it to 50 years. The maximum mortgage default guarantee period of second-hand subsidized flats will be extended to 50 years. For primary market, we recommend to extend it from 25 years to 30 years. We'll pass on the recommendations to the Housing Authority for its consideration. For redevelopment, we currently have 10 redevelopment projects in hand, including 4 factory buildings and a number of residential developments, which are either being studied for redevelopment or being redeveloped. We will demolish about 17,000 residential flats and 4,800 factory estate units. After redevelopment, we'll be able to provide some 32,800 flats. We will review different old public housing estates. We are currently reviewing these housing estates, and if we have any news on redevelopment projects, we will announce them in due course. We are seeing more and more new housing estates being completed, so we have to see and study how we can enhance estate management. We strive to promote smart estate management. We will select 10 PRH estates as pilot sites. We're going to test out different new technologies, including Internet of Things, sensors, artificial intelligence, and mobile devices, to make estate management more efficient. And we want to provide a better and safer living environment for residents. We have been adopting MIC approach to enhance speed for producing housing. Currently, we're adopting MIC 1.0, and we will study the feasibility of taking forward MIC 2.0 to shorten the construction process. With regards to issues concerning subdivided units, it's always of our concern. We have traditional housing, light public housing, which are being delivered. And this allows us to tackle the SDU issue. Currently, we have been implementing tenancy control on SDUs. We will strengthen enforcement effort. Rating and Valuation Department will check landlords of no less than 1,000 SDU households on whether they have committed offenses for regulated tenancies. As mentioned, we have to tackle SDU issues. And this is what we strive to do moving forward. So we have set up a task force on tackling the issue of subdivided units, which will be led by the Deputy Financial Secretary with me as the Deputy. Last week, we held the first meeting under the task force, and we discussed with relevant bureau and departments on how we can tackle issues concerning SDUs. So we made our first step. Our target is to, within 10 months' time, present recommendations to Chief Executive. There are 4 directions that we are going to work towards, including 1, setting minimum standards of living conditions for SDUs in terms of building safety, fire safety, and hygiene requirements, etc. We'll make recommendations on how to eradicate substandard SDUs. We also want to prevent the resurgence of substandard SDUs. It's not easy to address all these problems, and it's not an easy task at all. So we'll have to come up with effective administrative and legislative proposals.
Regarding private housing, according to the LTHS, a total of 132,000 units are needed in the coming decade. We are ready to provide about 80,000 units, and we will make available sufficient land. We will also enhance the housing ladder that bridges the public housing and private housing markets. In this policy address, it is mentioned that the demand-side management measures, DSMMs, will be adjusted for residential properties effective from the 25th of October 2023. There were a couple of measures. 1. Shortened the applicable period of the special stamp duty SSD from 3 years to 2 years. 2. Reduced the respective rates of the buyer stamp duty BSD and the new residential stamp duty NRSD by half from 15% to 7.5%. 3. Introduce a stamp duty suspension arrangement for incoming talents acquisition of residential properties. For eligible incoming talents acquiring a residential property on or after the 25th of October 2023, they can apply for suspension for BSD and NRSD, but they still need to pay ad valorem stamp duty at Scale 2 rates. The mark will be seen by both lawyers. Upon the Inland Revenue Department IRD's approval of the application for suspension, a statutory charge will be constituted in favor of the collector of stamp revenue automatically by law. The IRD will register the related certificate of the charge at Land Registry. After becoming a Hong Kong permanent resident, the eligible incoming talent can submit an application for waiver to the IRD for waiving the relevant liability. Upon the IRD's approval of the relevant application, the IRD will issue a certificate of discharge. If the talent fails to become a Hong Kong PR within 9 years from the date when he or she is permitted to stay in Hong Kong under designated talent admission scheme, or under specific triggering circumstances, he or she will be liable to pay the stamp duty concerned within 30 days, otherwise late stamping penalty will apply. We also support families with newborns to raise the chances for families with newborns to purchase subsidized sales flats SSFS. The Hong Kong Housing Authority HA will introduce families with newborn flat selection priority scheme. A quota of flats will be reserved for balloting. Priority flat selection by families with newborns. The target is that the family applicants with babies born on or after the 25th of October 2023 until the children reach the age of 3. The effective date is the next HOS sale exercise, that is next year. We will add 10% on top of priority scheme for families with elderly members, totaling 40%, covering families with newborns flat selection priority scheme. They enjoy priority while choosing flats. As I mentioned, they will be given priority to select flats before ordinary family applicants and one-person applicants. That is, eligible families enjoy such benefits until their children reach the age of 3, so that they have sufficient time to consider whether to purchase SSFs, and their chance of success for purchasing flats can also increase. Families with newborns allocation priority scheme, the target is to allow families with babies born on or after the 25th of October 2023 to have their waiting time for PRH flats reduced by 1 year. This will become effective starting from April 2024. A total of 15 members have pressed the button to request to speak. Question and answers, 4 minutes each. First, Mr. Vincent Chang. Thank you, Chairman. First of all, thank you, Secretary, for your efforts, and also thank you for setting up the task force to tackle SDUs. SDU tenants and owners also support this, and they want to eradicate the problem as well. Some SDU tenants reflected to me, especially those living in very substandard SDUs. They are afraid that they will become homeless. They will have no roof to live under. So we emphasize the importance of relocation arrangements. But the policy address makes no mention of it. What is the reason behind? What about rehousing them? Tenancy control of SDU is also important. In theory, for 110,000 units, How many tenancy control notices have you received? Will you consider enhancing enforcement actions? They do have the responsibility to submit the tenancy control notices, but the situation is far from ideal right now. Thank you, Mr. Chang. Thank you for recognizing our resolve to eradicate SDUs. All of us are on the same page. We are willing to take the step forward. We have made it clear this is no easy task. We have to master the situation well, but when they took the first step forward, we know that public housing supply is sufficient. 410,000 units can definitely meet the demand of 300,000 or so. These will materialize in the coming 5 years. So we have light public housing as well as transitional housing to help. The principal officials said that we need to master the pace well. We don't want to see anyone homeless in our community. So the process is very important. In the coming 10 months, the report of the task force matters in order to quicken the pace. We know that this is at the top of the agenda. Fortunately, we have transitional housing, we have light public housing, traditional public housing, as well as land available. With transitional housing, tenants being able to transition to public housing, we need to take a multi-pronged approach to take care of every single aspect well. For tenancy control, we need to thank the relevant colleagues from the Rating and Valuation Department, RNVD. Over 20 cases have been dealt with. Some of them had to pay as much as $18,000. Coming up next, there's going to be a target of 1,000. We request the owner to provide information to prove that they have already satisfied the tenancy control requirements. I will invite Mr. Kevin Seal, Commissioner of Rating and Valuation, to supplement. Thank you. We have enhanced publicity and education to remind everyone to abide by the law. We also take legal action as well as enforcement action. 22 cases have been pursued with some convictions. Coming up next, we have 16 cases in relation to SDU owners. They have already been summoned, awaiting hearings. At the same time, there are some other cases pending investigation. With the efforts of the enforcement action team, there will be more cases to be dealt with. We are confident that we can take action against tenants who do not submit the tenancy control notices. That is the notice of tenancy. Next, Mr. Stanley Ng. Thank you, Chairman. A lot of housing initiatives floated by the FTU have been accepted by the Chief Executive as reflected in the policy address. Housing policies have been the focus, and we have been seeing results. In the document submitted by the administration, there are some figures. Indeed, the figures at the beginning of the stage are on the low side. For figures after 2029, I'm not sure how you will be able to achieve your target. You are providing projections for the figures, but how will you monitor the implementation of the initiatives? I'd be interested to know. Next, about SDUs. The government has taken on board the FTU's proposal and has deployed a dedicated team to deal with SDUs. But regarding how to set standards and facilitate cross-departmental collaboration to make it effective, ultimately, it all boils down to the number of new public housing flats as well as SSFs. If you don't have any housing flats available, how can you set a standard? Your standard may be very low. You dare not adjust the figures, the target. So you have to enhance your efforts to enhance the supply of public housing. Can you further enhance the speed in order to tackle the problem of SDUs? In relation to cross-departmental collaboration, we have yet to know the details. In the past, enforcement action still needed to be enhanced. Well, I think you're just scraping by. Without sufficient housing, of course, you cannot meet the demand of the community. I'd like to know more about this situation from the Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Stanley Ng. Indeed, the situation mentioned by Mr. Stanley Ng is exactly because of a lack of public housing and land. We have a tight supply of land. Having said that, we have done a lot on the supply of land, so much so that in the first decade, LTHS, the number last year was 360,000, but this year, the land will allow us to build as many as 410,000 public housing units. That is a much better buffer. We are emboldened to do so. We are taking forward these projects at full steam. So, by and large, we do have the opportunity to deal with SDUs. In fact, both of these issues are interrelated. As I explained to Mr. Vincent Chang, in dealing with SDUs, we also need to factor in housing supply to see how we can take forward these two projects or deal with these two matters in tandem. I myself lead a task force leading different bureaus to adopt technologies in MIC. We have done a lot. If time permits, I can tell members more about this, such as phased completion and expedited completion. Next, Mr. Lee Chen-kang, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. I thank the Secretary for Housing and her team for the well-designed policy initiatives to tackle the long-term problem of housing. While short, medium, and long-term solutions or policies are needed, we see that you have adopted MIC or relevant technologies to build light public housing and so on. But in relation to short-term measures, we do need short-term measures instead of those in the long run. For public housing units, some are being abused, some are being occupied for a prolonged period. I understand that you are implementing smart estate management, but will you adopt big data to tackle abuse? I am also concerned about finance. With so much public housing, of course, this involves a lot of taxpayers' monies. They are willing to pay, but in relation to maintenance, repair of these public housing units, actually, we are concerned that you cannot make ends meet? Will you roll out more housing letters for people to buy their own homes? Say 80% of the entire block for mandatory buyout, so that for major maintenance or repair, citizens' rights can be protected. Thank you.
要打答。
Secretary, I'll briefly respond to Mr. Lee's questions. In terms of short-term measures, as you know, we already have transitional housing in place. I've talked to some SDU tenants that if they need, they may move to transitional public housing. Last week, there was some transitional housing units completed. We have 13,000 light public housing units as well as transitional housing units to be completed. Ms. Law and I attach importance to short-term measures, and Ms. Law will talk about what measures we have in place. To give you some figures, due to abuse of public housing resources, we have recovered 2,200 over the past year. And for the first 4 months of this year, we have recovered about 1,100 public rental housing units due to abuse. In the coming 5 years, a lot of public rental housing units will be completed. To ensure effective estate management, it's essential. That's why we propose in the policy address the smart estate management system. As we see some public rental housing estates age, we adopt this management system to ensure effective estate management. In terms of abuse of public housing resources, we have been tackling the problem with a multi-pronged approach. In terms of land registration, as well as water, electricity, if we receive any complaints in these areas, we have been carrying out checks and investigations. However, we aren't able to always match our data with the information given, so we are rolling out a new policy. Public rental housing tenants will have to make declarations every 2 years, and we're authorizing the housing authority to do data checking. And this is going to overcome the challenges that we faced in the past. So we are going to take actions not just when we receive reports. When we receive information or reports, we have a dedicated team to conduct investigation in different housing units. In the past, we didn't have the capacity to do so under Housing Authority, but in the future, we will roll out more and more measures, and we will disclose the relevant details in due course. The Secretary and I have a clear target that we are not going to be lenient. Mr. Kenneth Leung. Thank you, Chair. I'm glad to see that in the policy address there are measures to support families with newborns, and there are different measures to support them, including handout of cash as well as housing support. I think this is a great change in terms of the government's policy vision. I have a few questions. First, the Housing Authority is rolling out 2 schemes for family with newborns. The administration is going to advance the relevant applications for families with newborns, and this measure is going to be rolled out for 3 years, or until the baby is 3 years old. I wonder what kind of other measures are going to support the families with newborns. And do you have planned to extend the flat allocation priority scheme to other types of applicants. In order to be able to select the flats first, people will have to wait for balloting. I wonder if you're going to allow families with newborns to have a higher chance to win the balloting. Also, I'm glad that the administration is taking on board G19's suggestions on relaxing the mortgage default guarantee arrangement. I wonder if you're going to extend the guarantee period to 60 years instead of 50 years. I want to understand the rationale behind this arrangement. Secretary. Mr. Leung asked about the schemes for families with newborns, and it covers the GHS as well as the private SSF scheme and HOS units. We're going to share our recommendations with the Housing Society to see if it's going to extend the scheme to other types of applicants. Well, applicants will have to join the balloting, and we think that it's appropriate for us to roll out the scheme for each family with newborn for 3 years, so they have three chances of joining the balloting. And if there are more newborns in the family, then they will be able to join the priority scheme for one more time or a few more times. We've also heard views about whether we should extend the mortgage default guarantee period to 60 years. We've done some calculation, and we want to adopt a risk-based approach. The longer the mortgage default guarantee period, the higher the risk will be given the external environment we're facing. In the past, the mortgage default guarantee period was 30 years, and the most difficult period we were facing was from 1997 to 2003. In 2003 and 2008, we saw financial crisis, and there was default payment of mortgage. And the Housing Authority had to pay a commitment of $970 million. And over the years, the Housing Authority has covered a commitment of $970 million. We think 50 years is appropriate. You can look at the housing estates which are 10 years old or above. And before we relaxed the period, it was about 10%, and after we saw the relaxation, it's about 98%. Mr. Kitson-Young, I think the government is making a first very good step to encourage childbirth, and the flat selection priority scheme as well as the allocation priority schemes are great, but they can be further improved. Here are my suggestions. I believe you have had a grasp on the number of applicants with newborns. If you already have such information or data in hand, perhaps you can allocate flats to them early so that they can select flats early, and you can then refine your work procedures accordingly. Secondly, I think there is not enough supply. Take 2022 as an example. There are about 32,500 newborns. Say 10% of them, about 3,000 children, may need priority in terms of being offered a public housing unit. If you have 4,000 flats for balloting for them, it's about 10%. Say there are 4,000 newborns that need to join the balloting for these 4,000 units, is just about 10%. The chance is not very high for them to win the ballot. If you are 100,000 units ahead of your target, I wonder if you can set aside more housing units for balloting for families with newborns. Secondly, there are measures to encourage lower class and middle class people to give birth. I wonder if you can roll out more measures to boost fertility. For instance, perhaps families with newborns can be exempted the buyer's stamp duty or other types of stamp duty. I think these measures can also encourage childbirth. I'd also like to talk about the housing ladder. How can we further improve circulation of housing units? A lot of HOS tenants, they have bought the HOS unit, but they do not want to sell it. It's not because they don't want to sell it, it's because they are afraid that they won't be able to purchase another flat. I wonder if you can allow HOS tenants, after they have sold their current flat, allow them to be green form applicants to buy another flat in the second-hand market. Secretary. For those who are in the queue for public housing unit, we have the relevant information. And they are having their applications handled 1 year in advance. As for the mortgage default guarantee arrangement, we are allowing the relaxation to help circulation of flats in the second-hand market. As Mr. Yang said, we will look into whether it's necessary for us to roll out other tax measures. But we think that we have enough measures in place in this policy address. Also, to give you some figures for the flat selection scheme or the allocation priority scheme, well, currently in the queue for families with babies aged 0 to 1, it accounts for 44%. Even if we allow them to join the two schemes, it's not going to affect the chance of balloting. We have to be careful here because there are other types of public housing units available, so we have to take a balanced approach. Same for HOS units. People who are interested in buying HOS flats and who are also families with newborns aged 0 to 1, they account for 10%, and those with elderly in their families account for about 30%. Next, Mr. Michael Teen. Thank you, Chair. Over the years, when the administration plans for public rental housing for a household of 3 persons or above, the area is about 70 square meters. I think the floor area should be increased, and I'm glad to see that the government is enlarging the area by 10% for a household with 3 persons or above. That is 77 square meters. I understand that the government has identified land for building 410,000 units. I hope that the government can set a new target for the coming 10 years to accommodate the change in the floor area of units for 3 persons or above. That is, for every 3 years, the area will have to increase by 10%. We've talked to a lot of people who are living in 3-person or 4-person households or units. if you increase the area, it would be a very good incentive for families with 3 persons or 4 persons because they may plan to have another baby. There are about 1 million adults living in public housing units. I was asking if the government can work with the land registry to review the record of these 1 million tenants. You should investigate whether they possess another property. You don't need to wait for them to make declaration. You can recover their units right away if they possess another property other than the one that they're staying in now. You don't need AI technology to do so. You simply need to come up with a software or program to carry out the investigation or checking. Lastly, when the tenancy control took effect, we asked the administration to regulate the rental level. I wonder if under the task force for tackling SDU issues, you will set up a database. Thank you.
多謝田議員。
Secretary, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Michael Tien. First of all, on the flat size for our decade-long planning, we are, in the 8th to 10th years, we have set aside flats that are 10% larger. Whether there is any room to enlarge the flats, there are a lot of factors at play. We have to tread cautiously. With flats being bigger, we need more land. The development of the city, the pace, we will have to take into account all these factors when we move forward. For families with 3 or 4 people, it is best to have 1 or even 2 children. For rents, with the data we have, the data do fluctuate. In different districts, there are also changes. SDUs are very special in the sense that the age of the buildings, the quality of the buildings, their locations, all these factors have a bearing on the rents. This is a complex issue. It is not easy to draw a conclusion right away. Say, the flat size in Sham Shui Po, hence a rent of how much? Well, all these change. There are many different factors. So, to have a starting rent, then this provides us with a basis to look into the issue. And I will ask my colleague to speak on the work with the Lands Registry. If we have intelligence or tip-off, there will not be any problem to take legal action or enforcement action with Land Registry. It's not all about developing software. If we need comprehensive information, then there are privacy concerns. Right now, tenants have to declare whether they have other property in possession. They authorize us to check with the Lands Registry. This will make our work more efficient. About reporting or declaration, if the tenant provides false information, then we can take legal action against them. But I have asked the Privacy Commissioner. Well, your time is up. Next, Mr. Lau Kwok-fan. Thank you, Chairman. I'm glad to know that in the coming decade, a total of 410,000 public housing units will be provided, 100,000 units above the target of the LTHS. This shows the government, all the officials have worked on the same page. Previously, we were trying to meet the targets in terms of figures. Now, with other policies, such as those in relation to childbirth, these can complement the housing policies, but I hope that the administration can take a more holistic approach. Some policies target nuclear families, but will we review the entire public housing income regime? Every year we conduct a review. For one person, the income is 12,900 or so. For two people, the income is some 90,000. 19,000. They cannot afford private housing, and the current public housing policies are of no help to them either. Can we review the policies? Previously, we worked very hard to churn out units, but right now we also stress the importance of quality. Can we increase the size of the public housing units from 7 square meters to 10? Can they be allowed to purchase their own units in order to give them a sense of belonging? Will we also adjust the ratio of private to public houses in the northern metropolis? Can we enhance the housing ladder by providing the purchase of uncompleted buildings? Thank you, Mr. Lau. You've seen our concerted resolve to tackle housing problem. Development Bureau, Transport and Logistics Bureau, the Housing Bureau, all of us work together. We have been working in unison to tackle the housing problem. Regarding the income system, we have to tread very cautiously. At present, we have a good basis. Public housing is the most effective system to help the grassroots. Any tweak of the system at will may have a long-lasting impact, and we have to be careful. Well, for tenants purchase scheme, when some tenants have passed away, we do put the units under the tenants purchase scheme for sale. Right now, there are a total of 400 units. Right now, the waiting list is very long. When we have identified an estate under tenants purchase scheme, we will not be able to take these units back. So we need to carefully plan. The split 7 to 3, right. The split used to be 6 to 4. Right now, the split is 7 to 3. Yes, as against the split in 2018. Right now, the non-elderly tenants numbered 96,000 to 97,000 in total. Is there any room in the future? Our long-term housing strategy does analyze these aspects, and there will also be updates on the figures. Next, Ms. Dory Lee. Thank you, Chairman. I recognize the resolve of the current term government to tackle the housing problem, including the setup of a task force to tackle substandard SDUs. I'm looking forward a target to eradicate these substandard SDUs. I also recognize your childbirth policies. It's quite creative. That is, giving bonus points to families with newborns. Many young people apply for public housing even before graduation. That is the same for university graduates. Why can't some young people get married? Why are they not going to have children? One of the core issues is that with their sole income, they just cannot buy a flat of reasonable size. One of the focuses of the housing problem is to study public housing units or HOS units. You cannot improve the situation just with public housing. Actually, not just a waiting list for public housing. Well, the waiting list of the HOS. If the HOS waiting list is not linked to their income, well, they will not have to fear that they will not be able to buy a private flat without the help of their parents. There is no guarantee of buying a home within 3 years or 5 years. Then, how can they rest assured to have a child? Well, I think you have to study HOS flats. You should be able to increase the number of HOS flats, and there should be a waiting time for HOS. You just can't resort to balloting. Without the help of the parents, they can only resort to HOS. Actually, HOS flats are unaffordable to young people. Young people earn as much as $10,000 per month, but HOS units aren't cheap at all. You have to adjust HOS policies in order to make young people willing to stay in Hong Kong. Then they will have the confidence to get married, to have children. Have you ever given some thought to this? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Lee. Actually, there are quite a number of HOS flats in 2022, a total of 8,900 flats were sold. In 2023, 9,200 HOS units were sold. Every year, the average figure is 7,000 flats per year to be sold. If the waiting list is 133,000 with the target of 3 years obtaining a home, then the public housing supply will have to remain at 70% in order that next year we will be able to meet the target of obtaining a home within 3 years. But we do understand that young people cast their eyes on HOS flats or even moving up the housing ladder. What is this link to obtaining a home in 3 years? Looking ahead, we have already heard Ms. Dory Lee. Well, I think you have to understand that 7,000, 8,000, or even 9,000. These are numbers on the low side. You are not willing to think about a waiting list for housing, for HOS units. Young people just can't purchase private housing without the help of their parents. You have to think about these young people. Well, for the land available for public housing, if we set aside more for public housing, the HOS waiting list impact, well, we have to take into account as well. We have already heard you, Ms. Lee. With more discussions discussions in the community, we will be in a better position to see how we can deploy our resources in order to solve the problem in a more appropriate manner. Next, Mr. Chen Haofeng.
Chair, in his policy address, the Chief Executive has taken on board a lot of suggestions made by DAB, including the lifting of spicy measures as well as the relaxation arrangement concerning the mortgage default guarantee period. I have a few questions. Recently, the tender exercise failed in Tongchong. The support facilities there, including the water pipes, are not able to afford the increase of housing supply. Say, for instance, there are 400 units originally, but they want to boost the supply to 600 to 800 units, but the drainage system there is not able to afford so many housing units to be built. Have you reviewed whether the supporting facilities are enough for you to build so many housing units? If you do not have the relevant supporting facilities, you won't be able to complete the housing units. Secondly, I agree with what Ms. Dari Lee said. If you encourage childbirth, can you guarantee the applicants with newborns to be allocated a flat instead of asking them to join the ballot? Can you adopt an accumulative system for them so that there is a higher chance for them to successfully purchase an HOS unit? Have you thought about rolling out these measures to encourage childbirth? Thirdly, I see that you are adopting innovative technologies to improve estate management. However, we've been seeing quite a number of complaints, especially in older housing estates. The communication between management companies and residents has been poor. A lot of time residents complain, but the management company does not follow up. In terms of cleaning, security, and environmental hygiene, and repair and maintenance, we've been seeing quite a lot of complaints from residents. I wonder if you have any ways to improve the situation. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chen. Supporting facilities and infrastructure are key for delivering public housing projects. The land that you mentioned in Tongchong concerns the work of the Development Bureau, so I don't have the relevant information here. We have identified a plot of land in Tongchong, and I have visited the site myself, and the drainage system is working fine. I thank members for the reminder. Before we allow residents to move in, we have to make sure that the utilities and relevant services are in place. So I have a working group comprising of members from DSD and WSD, etc., to help tackle the problem. In terms of the question about HOS for babies aged 0 to 3, they have a higher chance of being allocated an HOS unit. As to whether we should roll out more measures, we will keep in view the progress of the relevant schemes. In terms of estate management, we have heard members' views. We will strengthen communication with management companies. We will make use of the smart estate management system. We hope that we're able to spot any issues through the smart system instead of waiting for complaints to find out the relevant problems. So we will adopt a multi-pronged approach. Mr. Lam Man Kwong. Thank you, Chair. I'm glad that the government has been working hard on housing issues. The entire administration has been working hard, and I commend their efforts. I have a number of questions. First, on subdivided units, it is proposed in the policy address that the task force on tackling SDU issue will present recommendations in 10 months' time. I've heard views from people living in old areas. I've also heard views from welfare organizations who are helping these people. I've also heard views from elderly people who are concerned about adapting to the housing policy rolled out by the administration. I wonder if the government will conduct more consultation with relevant stakeholders. Many stakeholders would like to communicate directly with the government. How are you going to collect their views in the future? On subsidized sale flats, the mortgage default guarantee period is going to be extended to 50 years, and it's going to help circulation of flats. In his manifesto, the chief executive mentioned that he is going to expand the quota for white form applicants. Be it the primary market or the secondary market, people are hoping that the pressure of repaying mortgage loan will be reduced. Now, people have 25 years to repay their mortgage. I wonder if the government can talk to the banks and allow residents to pay back their loan in 30 years. Lastly, on redevelopment, well, there have been news about government's redevelopment projects. Well, we have to take a careful approach when we think about launching redevelopment projects. People living in older housing estates would like to see a roadmap or a timetable from the government. Say in Shakip Mei or in Namshan Estate, residents there are hoping that the government will redevelop their estates. We hope that the government can roll out the information on a regular basis so that people living in older estates have an idea on when their estates will be redeveloped. Secretary. On the question about the task force on tackling issues of SDUs, we have 10 months' time to present the recommendations. There are lots of things that we'll have to think about. It's complicated, and we have to be prudent as we draft the recommendations. With such a tight timeline, we're going to hold the discussion within various government departments and bureaux. We, however, welcome views from various stakeholders, including different political parties, as well as social welfare organizations. We will take into consideration these views. For quota of white form secondary market schemes, there are 4,500. We have just used up half of the quota. We are extending the mortgage default guarantee period from 30 years to 50 years. We may be seeing an increase in the number of people joining the scheme. If we are expanding the quota, that means there will be more people selecting the housing units. We want to stabilize the prices of HOS units in the second-hand market. As to redevelopment of public housing estates, we'll have to, as Mr. Leung said, take a prudent approach. We have to be careful and make proper decisions. We understand that some of the housing estates are getting old, but there are variables. We have to see whether we have resources to rehouse the residents. We also have to see whether we are able to get help from Development Bureau or relevant departments. So it's not like we have come up with a list of priorities for different housing estates to be redeveloped. Thank you. Now it's my turn. Housing policy is one of the highlights in the policy address this year. So there are many parts about housing and land. There are proposals concerning private housing as well as public housing. There are also arrangements to relax the spicy measures. BPA also agrees that the government should relax the spicy measures. There is also suspension of stamp duty payment for incoming talents, and this is in line with the government's policy on trawling for talents. There are issues concerning private housing as well as the HOS scheme. I hope the government can help young people to get onto the housing ladder. That's why there is public-private partnership to roll out starter home scheme as well as other types of public housing units for people to purchase. I hope the government can do more in this regard. The government mentioned that it has identified sufficient land for building 410,000 public housing units, and that it is ahead of its target compared to its original target of 308,000 units. This is a very promising figure. However, we have to see how much or how many of these units come from newly developed land and how many of them come from existing land. I understand that there are different activities being carried out on brownfield sites, say for construction sector. Some of the brownfield sites are used for storing heavy construction machines. A lot of the public housing projects are adopting the MIC approach, and the modules are often prefabricated before they are delivered to the construction sites. If you resume the brownfield sites and without relocating the brownfield operators, then how are the construction sector members going to store these machines and equipment? The government once mentioned that there will be land to rehouse the brownfield site operators in 2030. I understand that this is not directly under your purview, but this is definitely related to your work. Secretary.
Secretary, thank you, Chairman. On spicy measures, they were rolled out in 2010. At that time, worldwide, the interest rate was low. There was quantitative easing. Quite some investments were in the stock market, not to mention the residential property market. The housing prices were high, so spicy measures were rolled out alongside an increase in the stamp duty. There are interest hikes. All these make adjustments to the situation so that people make investments in a more calm manner. They do so in a more prudent manner. Actually, young people still want to obtain their own home. They do want to have their own children. As you can see, there is oversubscription by, 18 times. For the starter homes for Hong Kong residents, the subscription rate is even as high as 13 to 14 times. And the BSD has been reduced from 15% to 7.5% for PPP or for starter homes. As I mentioned, the Urban Renewal Authority, there are new schemes, and there are 5,800 projects ongoing, including in Tai Hang West and Anderson Road. In Tai Hang, a total of 2,000. For Yau Kam Tau, 2,000 as well. For Khao Pui Long, some 900 to 1,000. So the figures stand at a total of 6,000 to 7,000 for starter home projects or e-residence. We will take members' points on board. Thank you. Dr. Wendy Hong. I'd like to explore with you how many public housing units are needed. The public-private housing split is 30%. In Singapore, it is 4.6%. In Korea and Japan, it is one-digit figure. In mainland, same one-digit figure. In the UK, 20%, whereas in Hong Kong, it is as high as 30%. Public housing tenants are subject to income requirements. I have sets of figures to share with you. I have prepared a foam board. First of all, over 40% of the tenants on the waiting list, they are non-elderly people. 42% of the people on the waiting list have tertiary education qualifications, whereas for non-elderly, the figure is 32%. According to a study, it shows that 40% would like to purchase SSFs. Some people think that building public housing can solve the problem of SDUs, but actually over half of the people are not qualified to have PRH units. 34.2% of the people are in the sandwich class. They are earning more than $20,000 per month. Over half of the SDU tenants don't have a Hong Kong permanent resident ID card, including Southeast Asian people staying in Hong Kong as a refugee. If they don't live in SDUs, where else can they live in? SDUs are actually needed in Hong Kong. 22% of the people would like to buy GSH units or even HOS units. Well, actually, if you can resolve the problem, we don't need to build extra public housing. There are interest hikes alongside a downward property prices, but the oversubscription rate is as high as 18 times. 67% of the people are actually buying for the second time or even more. They are repeated applicants. The oversubscription is as high as 13 times. And the last set of data is the ratio of people owning their own homes. In 1997, over 22% were young people aged below 35, but in 2019 they only accounted for 7.6%. Why do young people not get married? Why don't they gonna have children? Why are they saying society is not fair? Well, we are not giving opportunities for them to move upwards. Will we adjust the ratio of building housing? Will we deploy resources to build SSFs so that the young people have upward mobility? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Wendy Hong. What you said is similar to that of Ms. Story Lee. In the general waiting register, the number is 133,000 people, whereas for elderly people, the number stands as 90,000. We have a tight housing supply. The waiting list at present has dropped to 5.3 years, but actually it is no easy task for us to make strides. It's still a long way to go before we can meet our target. The target of owning a home in 3 years, as Wendy Hong said, is it true that when we have more SSFs, then the requirements can be relaxed? Well, I think we do need more time to think about it. I don't have figures off the top of my head right now, but when we conduct studies about SDUs, is it true that as many as 34.2% of the people living in SDUs are earning more than $20,000 per month? Well, we have to look into that. We have to see whether it is true that they can apply for PRH. For the housing split of 7-3 or 6-4, they are interconnected, they are interlinked. We will tap the pulse of the community and we will also tread cautiously. Next, Mr. Andrew Lam. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Wendy Hong, for the data, which aren't far away from mine, so I'm not going to belabor the point. On the housing problem in Hong Kong, I don't think it is a problem about being homeless. Simply put, some 1,500 homeless people are in Hong Kong. If we have to tackle the most pressing issue, I first talk about the SDU problem. We do need to tackle SDU. We need to act promptly, but we cannot just act recklessly. Eradicating all SDUs just cannot solve some issues, such as affordability, location. These problems will still remain unsolved. But back to our vision. While the Secretary was answering Dr. Wen Hong and Ms. Dory Lee, I do agree that in short to medium term, expediting the supply of public housing is needed. So in the past 1 to 2 years, whether it be transitional housing or light public housing, however costly they are, I still support the government in these initiatives. When people have obtained subsidized housing, in theory, they cannot apply for public housing. For people who would like to come to Hong Kong, we cannot attract them with subsidized flats. That is not an appeal of the city. So indeed, this is a policy initiative we do have to think about. A decade or 2 decades ago, the tenancy expenditure ratio was some 30% spent on housing or management fees. In the past decade, the percentage is 40%, while 30% is the international standard, whereas the current 40% is an issue of affordability. For example, 300 square feet, $7,000 per foot, per square foot, 90% mortgage for 25 years, every month around $10,000. That is exactly 1/3 of the average family income of $30,000. We can still say that it is affordable. On the housing ladder, they need to move up the housing ladder step by step. For entry into the private housing market, the expenditure is some 40%. If I were a young person, I would still think that, well, it's hopeless. So we do need to think about the issue of mortgage default guarantee. In the global economic meltdown, the commitment was 900 million or so. It was simply a drop in the bucket in the current situation. So, can they simply purchase their own homes in order to compress the timeline of building public housing? Well, I'm not saying that it can be solved overnight, but this is the direction we need to work at. Secretary, thank you, Mr. Andrew Lam. We do recommend the mortgage loan repayment period to be extended from 25 years to 30 years. So, for some people who have purchased their own home, they can extend the repayment period to 30 years. That could ease the burden. In the policy address, we made it clear that we will set a standard which allows us to replace those below this target. Well, for an ordinary flat, it could be 1 + 1, but for subdivided flats, maybe people will subdivide the flats into smaller units with elderly people. Some of these units have good configurations, such as windows and so on. The rents aren't low at all. If the SDUs meet our standards, then they can still serve their purpose. Some people have their own properties, but they still look for SDUs because they have to look after their family members who may have fallen ill. hence their need to rent SDUs. We do understand the situation and we will analyze the situation with a task force. In the long run, in the short run, the public housing waiting list is still 5.3 years. But what about the medium to long term? We will take a look at the figures in the LTHS and we will update the figures and we will think about them. Next, Mr. Kwok Wai Kang.
Thank you, Chair. I have looked into the issue with subsidized sale flats. There are speculation activities in the second-hand market, so it's not easy to purchase a subsidized flat. We proposed extending the mortgage default guarantee period in the past, but the previous government said it wasn't necessary. Well, now the current term government is finally extending the mortgage default guarantee period. This proves that what we proposed was actually correct. I wonder if more public housing units will help unleash the potential of second-hand market of subsidized sale flats so that we can see more transactions under the white form secondary market schemes, because the scheme wasn't put to good use in the past. Now about families with newborns schemes. Some questioned why it only benefits newborns aged 0 to 3. Well, you mentioned that people can give birth to another baby. But if they give birth to another baby and they still aren't able to secure a flat under the balloting, they may be upset. There should be an accumulative system in place for scheme for families with newborns. If families giving birth to another baby should have a higher chance of securing a flat under the balloting. If they give birth to another child and they are still not able to secure a flat, they would be very, very upset. My third point is about this. It's about the stamp duty suspension arrangement for incoming talents. Understand that the government is trying to compete for talents. That's why it's rolling out the stamp duty suspension arrangement. But the charging order is it going to restrict the owner from leasing out the unit, say 7 or 8 years after the incoming talent has purchased a unit? He or she may be able to get enough rental income to cover the stamp duty. If you are to suspend the talents from paying the stamp duty at first, you can perhaps roll out more benefits to them so that we can reach a consensus towards rolling out such measure. Perhaps you can ask the talents to make certain contributions in order for them to enjoy the suspension. Secretary, we strive to listen to people's views as we devise our policies. As for the flat selection scheme, we are rolling it out for 3 years. We understand many people are waiting for public housing units. That's why we allow families with newborns to join the flat selection priority scheme for 3 years. As for the stamp duty suspension arrangement, we do not restrict the incoming talents from leasing out the unit they bought. Say for someone who comes to Hong Kong for the first time, they only will have to pay the ad valorem duty. And the talent can use the unit for his own use or for leasing out. Chair, I declare that I'm a member of the Housing Authority. I see that the government has been very proactive in taking forward the housing measures. I am happy that the government is taking on board G19's suggestions on relaxing the mortgage default guarantee arrangement. The Secretary said that there were about 80,000 applications under the White Form Secondary Market Scheme, but only about 2,000 was able to benefit from the scheme. After the banks is extending the mortgage default guarantee period, perhaps the data from 2022 to 2023 may no longer be applicable. On the question about subdivided units, I understand that there will be a task force on tackling SDU issues. I understand that there will be legislative proposals, and I'm happy to see that there will be community living rooms for SDU tenants. Some of the SDU tenants, they don't even have a living room in their home. I believe the community living rooms will be helpful. Some community groups may be able to help with rolling out the community living room scheme. According to the government's paper, it is said that some of the units can be set aside for PRH applicants because they can release their units. I wonder if the ad valorem's duty can come into play. I understand that for incoming talents, they have to meet 7 conditions in order to enjoy the suspension arrangement. For the capital investment entrance scheme, you're asking them to bring $30 million in order to join the scheme. Say I'm an investor, I plan to bring $30 million, but for the top talent pass scheme, you are only to become eligible if you can meet a certain level of salary. I think that there are some loopholes with both the investment entrance scheme and the top talent pass scheme. According to paragraph 32 of the paper, I understand that some units will be reserved for balloting under the flat selection scheme, but there is no specific mentioning of how many units will be set aside for balloting. Secretary, I thank Ms. Khan for the question. In terms of the White Form Secondary Market Scheme, we'll pay attention to the situation. We have relaxed the mortgage default guarantee period from 30 years to 50 years, and it may affect the White Form Secondary Market Scheme, and we will think about whether we want to increase the quota under the scheme. I myself appreciate the community living room idea as well. We need some time to eradicate substandard subdivided units. It cannot happen overnight, so community living rooms provide a good area or good space for SDU tenants. I understand that some projects are being prepared under the community living room schemes to provide, say, showering spaces for SDU tenants. We have transitional housing as well. There is communal area as well as living room for tenants. We have to allow enough social space for children. Once the SDU tenants move into transitional housing unit or light public housing unit, it will help with the development of children. As for the capital investment entrance scheme as well as the talent admission schemes, I will look into it. But currently the suspension arrangement is for incoming talents. Also, 40% of the HOS schemes will be set aside for balloting under the flat selection priority scheme. Thank you. Now it's my turn speaking for the second round. A number of members have spoken about subsidized sale flats. Recently, a project was rolled out and the oversubscription rate is 18 times. According to media reports, this number is a huge drop compared to that in the past. However, still, the units are oversubscribed by 18 times. The waiting list for public rental housing has been shortened. If we're seeing a lower oversubscription rate, that means we are seeing success, and we should continue to work hard. My second point is about redevelopment projects. There is a part in the policy address about the housing authorities' effort in continuing to take forward 10 redevelopment projects. In the past few days, there are media reports that the Choi Hong estate will be redeveloped, so there have been heated discussion about redeveloping public housing estates. Well, my party, BPA, and I have conducted a detailed study on redeveloping public housing estates. These redevelopment projects are going to bring about a lot of benefits. In the previous term government, well, members were not very keen on supporting redevelopment projects. There were more discussions about helping people to move into new public housing units first, then rolling out redevelopment projects. I hope there is a change of attitude among us. To tackle housing issue, we have to allow people to move into public housing estates earlier, but at the same time we also have to cater to the needs of people living in older housing estates to improve their living conditions, especially for elderly residents. They would like to be rehoused in the same district. If they are able to live in the same neighborhood, it will really help maintain the quality of their lives. I hope that the government will listen to the views of the residents and members. When it takes forward redevelopment projects, it should consider where to rehouse the residents appropriately. Also, you'll have to tackle the issue of housing estates which have been aging. Thank you.
簡單啲。
Thank you, Chairman. I will respond briefly. For the oversubscription of SSFs, we think alike. We feel alike. When I knew that the oversubscription rate is 18 times, I felt that we had to work harder. Between 2004 and 2014, we didn't have HOS units. When it was resumed, the oversubscription was as high as 60 times. Does it mean that it was less popular? Well, be it 60, 30, or 18 times of subscription, that is not healthy at all. Just like when an obese person has got thinner and thinner, that is healthier. As a couple of members mentioned, for medium and long-term measures, what should our strategies be? We will look at the overall figures. For redevelopment, actually, this is the 50th anniversary of the HA. We are still maintaining some estates that were commissioned long time ago. It does not mean that we accord priority to housing estates which are as old as 60 years old. An elderly person is not necessarily in bad health. I recently went to Wafu Estate, which would be redeveloped soon. Some metal racks or frames have already been put in place to prop up some structures. Day by day, some structures will age, so we need to consistently look for suitable housing estates for redevelopment. This is very meaningful. The cost of repair and maintenance dedicated to aged housing estates in the future, there's still going to be a lot of maintenance or repair. These housing estates, after redevelopment, will still pale by comparison to new redeveloped or new housing estates. Right in front of us, a lot of old housing estates can provide or can offer units for reallocation. It is difficult to have housing estates to run in tandem. We have already announced 10 redevelopment projects. We will continue to work along this line of work. When we have identified suitable housing estates, we will announce in due course. If there is no member lining up for discussion, we will finish this agenda item. Thank you, Secretary and her team. Indeed, the housing issue is at the top of the agenda. LegCo members will continue to urge the government to do what it should do. We will also bounce ideas around in order that the residents of Hong Kong can have a good living environment. Next agenda item, AOB. There's no AOB. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.